A few things before we get started. I am very irritated with Bill Schuette and Gretchen Whitmer. They scheduled their debate for when we're going to have this discussion. They didn't check with us. Really? That's terrible. Maybe we'll be done in time for you to go home and watch some of it. B, since the note was made about cell phones, if yours rings, I get to answer it. Okay, that's my rule in class. That's what it is tonight. Okay. 3, I have one rule when I do these talks, and that rule is that there are no rules. Okay, so whatever you want to do, we'll do. If so, I see no reason for you to wait until the end to ask questions. Then I got to back up through the slides and look at it again, right? Ask right away. Throw your hand up in the air, yell it out, whatever, okay? If you want to talk more about something that you see, let's do it. If you want to argue with me, that's even better, okay? That's fun, all right? Last thing, just a sort of an overview. I'm going to go a little bit rogue and stray away from that topic that we decided on months and months ago. What I want to do is talk to you about some of the most important dynamics that are at play right now in the 2018 election cycle, and talk about key factors that are going to impact what happens on November 6th. And we can, if you like, maybe even get into what that means from November 7th onward. So we will start with some historical context, get into those important dynamics, and and at the end take a look at status of the race, right? Sort of where we are now, just a little less than 2 weeks out from Election Day. Okay? Sound like a plan? Okay. So, historical context. This is a midterm year, right? Everybody knows what that is, right? Midway between the president's term. So the president's obviously not on the ballot. And we've got, at the national level, U.S. House of Representatives, U.S. Senate, right? Here are results for the president's party in every midterm year going back to 1938. Okay, so here you've got seat losses by the president's party in House of Representative races and Senate races back to FDR. Okay? The higher the bar, the deeper the seat loss. So, what's a good takeaway from this graph, from this chart? Losses, I heard. Sometimes big losses for the party of the president, right? It is historical trend. It is historical fact. It is a very, very common occurrence for candidates of the party of the president to lose at the midterm. Sometimes in massive amounts, right? You look at FDR in 1938, Democrats lost 71 seats in the House of Representatives. To show you just how big of a majority Democrats had at the time, 4 years later, they lost another 55. Now, FDR is king of seat loss, followed only by Barack Obama in 2010, 63 seats. Okay? So, throughout this historical period, the president's party has only gained seats in the U.S. House of Representatives twice. Twice. And in not very many, right? Clinton and George W. Anybody want to fathom a guess as to why Republicans did well in 2002? 9/11, right? Coming off of 9/11, country was still, it's hard to believe it during these times, but country was pretty unified. War on terror was just beginning. It was a advantageous time for Republicans. this will come up a little later too, but we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 times where the party of the president has gained seats in U.S. Senate elections. Also rare when we go back, right? So most of the time, the party of the president does poorly in a midterm. Anybody want to take a guess as to why? Yes, ma'am. Dissatisfaction with who? Dissatisfaction with the president. Why might that come about? Right? Unfulfilled promises, or maybe some things that were done that people don't like, right? So people get frustrated, they get irritated, they get disappointed with the president. And there's a big but that follows that though, right? Which is what? People are pissed at the president, but they can't take it out on him, right? He's not on the ballot, right? So what they do is they take it out on the next best thing, congressional candidates of his party. That gets you this, right? Now, does anybody want to take a guess as to the biggest variable, the biggest factor that goes into predicting seat loss? Nope. That's going to be huge. Voter turnout will be hugely important in 45 minutes. I got economy out there. Okay, that's coming in 5 minutes. Who controls? Because they've got more seats to lose, maybe? Possible. Yes, sir. Voter turnout again, that'll come up. If people are going to be frustrated with the president, how might they reflect that? Even though they can't vote for him. Right. The biggest factor, louder, of approval of presidential job approval. Here you go. Here's a little scatter plot of, and what you've got, they're nicely labeled, but change in House seats, presidential approval at right before the midterm, right? So what you've got is the lower the president's approval rating, the deeper the seat loss, right? Makes total sense. People are pissed at the president. The more pissed they are, the more his party loses, right? Not terribly complicated. So what does that mean for 2018? Here's Trump's job approval. You laugh, right? Now. So what you've got here is the Real Clear Politics polling average. I think this is the best way to look at these kinds of polling data. Because what Real Clear Politics does is they take all the polls that are out there, all the good ones, and they average them. Sort of put them together so you got an average of poll results, right? So it's really robust. It's a little noisy from time to time, right? But it's really robust. So as of this morning, Donald Trump has a 44% job approval, 52% disapproval. There are a number of things to take away from this figure. First, look at that. Right at the start of the year, he was 36% job approval. That's really bad, right? That's really bad. 2, since then, it's gone up, right? And even since October started, he sort of took this dip over the summer, maybe July, August, bounced back up to that 44 mark, and that's kind of been his ceiling if we take away right at the start of his term. So I would say Trump job approval is going up this year. Ma'am, I wouldn't put anything up here if I didn't trust it. All sorts of quality survey organizations, Gallup, Washington Post, ABC, New York Times, a bunch of them, right? Now, and they may disagree a little bit on, you're smirking. You don't believe any of the polls?
No,
Well, it depends on, I mean, how deep do you want to get into polling data, right? Should we start talking about sample size and margin of error and all that stuff? Well, there's some of that. There's some of that. That's why this is a good way to look at it, right? It's got the lefty polls, it's got the right-wing polls, right? I shouldn't say that. Scratch that. I'll just leave it at, I wouldn't put it up here if I didn't trust it. Okay? So job approval going up. Disapproval going down, right? That's pretty positive for Trump and Republicans. One last thing about this. Trump job approval right now is darn near what it was for Barack Obama right at his first midterm. Now, that's interesting, to me anyway, right? That Trump and Obama are at this point in time seen sort of the same way by the American public. That's good news for Trump on one hand, but there's a catch-22 there, is that Obama lost 63 seats at the midterm, right? So, you know, on the one hand, he's on par with Obama. On the other hand, and I'll use President Obama's words from after 2010, they got shellacked, right, at the midterm. So this is an important factor, right? But there are conflicting factors beyond Trump for 2018, and we're going to get into a bunch of those. Here are some really important, at least for politics, economic indicators, okay? And these have shown over time to be good indicators, good predictors of how an election's going to turn out, if we think really broadly. So, unemployment, really low, right? Last month it was what, 3.7%? That's absurdly low. If you ask economists, and my friend Buck Dillon, who's an accountant, but he was in the B school at Oakland, right, will tell us that if we ask economists, some of them will tell you that's about as low as it's ever going to be. That there's they would term it full employment. That there's just some natural unemployment that's going to be out there. So we're close to full employment, which is really rare. Wage growth, it's been kind of stagnant for several years, but it's ticking up. GDP, last quarter was 4.5 something. That is on fire. The economy is roaring, right? Consumer sentiment, really high. Another way we can look at this is Gallup asks people, what's the most important problem facing the country? Never, well, I shouldn't say that. Since 1991, it has never been lower. The economy as the most important problem. So the public doesn't even see the economy as hugely important, meaning they're pretty satisfied with how the economy's going, right? So what would you think that would mean for this midterm? Yes, sir. It's a non-motivator. For who? So Democrats wouldn't be hacked off at economic performance. Okay? Okay. Fair enough. Why are we going to throw the bums out, right, if the economy is doing really well? Fair enough. So that would mean that's a good thing for Republicans, right? It should be, right? The economy's rip-roaring. People are pretty satisfied with it. Why should we change things up, right? That's totally fair. So you got some conflicting factors, right? Trump job approval would tell us one thing. Economic performance would tell us another. And we can see that in a couple of different figures. So what you've got here is, over time, simple plot of seat gain and loss. Here the axes are reversed, but it's the same deal. Presidential approval here, seat loss or gain here, and if we just went by historical trend, if we judged or if we forecast midterm elections just by presidential approval, if that's the only variable we factored in, Republicans would lose 68 seats. I'm sorry? Can we turn the lights down a little more, Derek? Thanks. Got it. Better? More? Better? Okay. Yeah, this one's a little light. Apologies. If we just use presidential approval to predict seat loss for Republicans, this would tell us, presidential approval alone would tell us Republicans lose 68 seats. That's one variable, right? If we change the variable and do the same prediction, if we use the economy, it would tell us Republicans would gain 55 seats, right? So it is a tale of two variables. And what the point of this is, in 2 weeks, it's not going to be this, and it's not going to be this. Those are two extremes, right? It's going to be somewhere in the middle. Is it going to be 40 seats, 30 seats, 20 seats? We got to wait and see, right? And we'll look at a few things coming up that might tell us a little bit more. Yes, sir. Oh, absolutely.
I mean, the Republicans are not pushing tax cuts and talking about the economy.
That's correct. They are.
Talking about things that make people angry.
And Democrats are doing the same thing.
Because that promotes turnout.
Yes. And turnout, as we'll see, is going to be. Well, it's the only factor that matters at this point, and we'll get to that. But you're correct. Just in terms of sort of more historical context and sort of how this fits in with other midterm results, that's kind of that's the point, right? So, more conflicting factors, though. This is another tried and true polling number, the right direction, wrong track number. And it just simply asks people, do you think the country's headed in the right direction, or are we off on the wrong track? And you'll note a number of things from this figure. It goes back to inauguration of Barack Obama, right there. That is the last time we were at 50-50. Think about that. The last time we were at 50-50, and it was for a fleeting moment that we were at 50% thought we were heading in the right direction, 50% thought we were off on the wrong track. Note, too, here, during President Obama's term, there were 2 points at which 75% of the country thought we were going in the wrong direction. Now, it could be for a number of different reasons, but that's historically high. And Trump got there that's 2016. Here's Trump inauguration in 17. So that was 2016. And it's come down ever since. Trump pops back up here end of 2017. But again, note, it's been going up. The right direction number has been going up. That's a stark improvement from not that long ago. Another one. This one goes without saying. This is congressional job approval. Disapproval, approval, if you couldn't figure that out. It is abysmal, to say the least, right? Everybody hates Congress. Everybody hates Congress. Anybody want to take a guess as to why? Why is Congress so unpopular? Yes, ma'am. Gridlock. And yes, I would say that is a big factor. Any other answers for why Congress is so unpopular? Yes, ma'am. Partisanship, bickering, right? Absolutely. Don't work together. Couldn't agree more. You are on the money. You're both right, and you're both wrong. Because the reason that Congress is the most disliked branch of government is C-SPAN. You can tune in and watch the dysfunction, okay? You can watch them argue and not get anything done, right? The doors of Congress have been opened, and you can watch a congressional hearing, for instance, when they're at each other's throats, when it takes 9 hours to talk about one paragraph of one bill, right? And people just go, "Are you freaking kidding me? I can't take," and they hate it, right? That's why Congress is so disliked. It is so disliked because it's the most public branch that we have. Yeah, Buck. You'd think you and I talked before, right? Because in fact, that's the next slide. This is a graph of Gallup data going back that asks Americans, do you think that your representative deserves re-election? What about most members of Congress? Do they deserve re-election? And there is a some years bigger gap than others, but this gets right to your point that most Americans can't stand Congress and all those members, but they sure like their member, right? My congressperson is doing a great job. My congressperson got road money, got bridge money, got R&D money. Anybody want to put a 4-letter word on that? Pork, right? Pork barrel spending, pork barrel, everybody hates pork except when it's in my district. That's right. Right? Way to go, Mike Bishop. Way to go, Debbie Stabenow. Way to go, Gary Peters. Spend all that money for us, not those other bums. Yeah.
There's also a bit of confirmation bias going on that chart.
This one?
If I voted for Mike Bishop, I'm going to be embarrassed to say that I don't like it.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point. Nobody wants to back a loser, right? Nobody wants to admit they're wrong, right? I mean, so what you've got over time is that Americans, every year, more Americans say that their member deserves re-election versus the rest of them. The rest of them are bums, right? So 2018, we're at about 26% think most members of Congress deserve re-election. 51%, they're a member. Compare this to a couple important years. First, 98 and 2002. 98, 2002. Anybody remember why those 2 years are important? Nope, we just talked about it. The party in power gained seats in the House of Representatives in those 2 years. And those public opinion numbers are significantly higher than where we are today, right? They are similar to 2010, a big anti-incumbent, anti-party in power year. This would tell us, and shoot, all of history, well, back to 1938 would tell us 2018 is going to shape up to be a pretty bad year for Republicans, right? This is more evidence of that. This is a chart to show you that all of the battlefield, all of the fighting, it's politics, right? We can say that, is on Republican-held turf. What you've got in this chart is a guy named Charlie Cook and his team in Washington. They write something called the Cook Political Report, and they are election handicappers. And what they do is they take all 435 House seats and they put them in one of 7 categories. First category is safe. Safe seat. Either the Republican candidate or the Democratic candidate is going to win. Period. Think of Berkeley, California. Okay? Democrat is going to win in Berkeley, period. Forever. There's just too many Democrats. You could do the same thing in Chicago, New York, Detroit, Safe Republican seat, think of the panhandle of Oklahoma. There's just too many Republicans there, right? Or North Dakota, Idaho, Montana, except they have the Democratic senator, which we'll see him in a little bit. So there are those kind of seats, safe Republican, safe Democrat. Then there are seats that are competitive, but are likely to go to the Republicans. Seats that are competitive, but likely to go to the Democrats. Seats that are competitive, but lean to the Republicans. Seats that are competitive, but lean to the Democrats. And then the most competitive of all, those toss-ups. And look at how much the field is tipped to Republican seats. And I can't even really use that anymore, because look at all of these Republican-held seats in red here that already lean to the Democrats. Right? There are 13 seats out there in Arizona, California, Colorado, Florida, Iowa, Illinois, Kansas, Michigan 11. We'll come back to that one. Minnesota, New Jersey, Pennsylvania again, and Virginia that look like they're going to go already over to the Democrats. Anybody know how many seats Democrats need to win control of the House? 23. There are 4 that are not just lean Democrat, but likely Democrat. So let's give Democrats 4 Republican pickups, 13 more, that's 17. 6 more and they get control, right? Look at all these Republicans have to defend. Now, there are a couple of promising pickups for Republicans, one in Pennsylvania, one in Minnesota. This one in Minnesota is also, some would say, is trending Republican, but that is a lot of turf that Republicans have to defend. We'll see how this turns out, right? Because, well, we'll come back to that. The Senate battleground is a little different. Here, and these numbers have changed a little bit because of some special elections, but heading into the election cycle, Democrats have to defend 25 Senate seats. Republicans, 8. Okay? And look at some of those states that Democrats have to defend. Montana, North Dakota, Missouri, Indiana, West Virginia. Some of those states sound familiar from the last month or so. Joe Manchin, Claire McCaskill, Heidi Heitkamp. We'll come back to them. They'll come up again. Here's the same chart for Senate races as of this morning. There are 4 Democratic toss-ups, 4 Republican toss-ups, 1 and 1 Democratic-held seat that is leaning to the Republicans. How many seats do Democrats need to take control of the Senate? 2. But they got to defend 4 toss-ups, Florida, Indiana, Missouri, Montana, and then pick up 2 of the 4 Republican toss-ups. And we could argue about the inclusion of some of these. I'll show you some polling on that too. So it's an interesting political context, right, where you've got Democrats don't need that many seats, relatively speaking, to take control of either branch, either chamber of Congress, right? 23 in the House, 2 in the Senate. And 1 is overwhelmingly Republican turf, right? Overwhelmingly, Republicans have to defend just a ton of seats. But in the Senate, it's a totally different story, right? That Democrats are the ones on the defensive in the Senate races. So you've heard about, the blue wave, right? Is the blue wave coming? Oh my gosh, is it going to crash? Or is it whatever the metaphor is you want to use. I don't know. But in the House, the answer seems to be, or points to one thing, but in the Senate, it points to something totally different. And we'll continue to look at some of that. In midterm elections, we were talking about turnout before. Republicans typically enjoy a turnout advantage in midterms. And that's because midterm electorates, the people that show up on election day, tend to be whiter, wealthier, and older. That tends to favor Republicans. Here's one examination of that. Here is turnout by age over time, split into 4 different age categories. 18 to 29-year-olds are horrendous at voting. They stink, right? There was a 4-point dip between their turnout in 2012 and in the last midterm, 16%, right? That's a smaller dip than 30 to 44-year-olds or 45 to 59-year-olds. But when you start at 20%, it's really, I mean, you know, there's not too far down to go. And older Americans, right, the dip remains, but it's a smaller one. Oh, I'm sorry, that's 2010 to 2014. Here's your comparison. I'm looking at it wrong. That's 2014, that's 2012. Right, so there's, and that's really the one you want to look at is midterm versus presidential, midterm versus presidential, midterm versus presidential, right? And in fact, let's do the math real quick here. That's what, 25. It's about the same, a little smaller, a lot smaller, right? So there's a huge gap for younger Americans. Younger Americans, 2012, 2016, 2008, important constituency for Democrats. If they don't show up, it's bad for Democrats, right? So whiter, wealthier, and older electorate, positive for Republicans. But you're going to say, don't Democrats have an enthusiasm advantage this year? Aren't they going to turn out like gangbusters? Democrats certainly have been chomping at the bit to vote in 2018. Democrats have been waiting 2 years to vote in 2018. Democrats have been excited to vote for 2 years. Here is, again, some more Gallup data. And in 2018, it tells us that 55% of the public is more enthusiastic than usual about voting. That's a sizable number. It's not been that big since Gallup's been tracking it back to 1994. 94 was another enormously important midterm that had a huge impact on American politics. That's the year Newt Gingrich led the Republicans to contract with America. Republicans win a bunch of seats, take control of Congress for the first time, take control of the House for the first time in 40 years. And it was only 37% more enthusiastic. Right? Think about that comparison. 2010, you know, big Democratic losses, right? Big losses for the president's party, but only 50%. 55% this time. But if we look at it by party, it tells us something different. Here it is, broken down by party. Democrats and Republicans are almost at parity in terms of their enthusiasm for voting, or their excitement level for voting in 2018. That is a significant piece of information. Democrats had an enthusiasm advantage for 18 or 20 months. It's now gone. Republicans have caught up. The Republican base is excited. Here's another way to look at it. Certainty of voting Again, Republicans and Democrats at almost equal. That is important for you to think about going in the next 2 weeks in terms of expectations of what might happen. So the Democratic enthusiasm advantage is kaput. There's a reason for it, and we're coming to that. Here's a very interesting figure from the Washington Post. And it's dated, but think about how it might have changed in the last couple of months. So this is from July. And again, how likely are you to vote in 2018? All adults, 58% said that they were likely to vote. Democrats, 57%, Republicans, 65%. The biggest finding on this chart, those that strongly approve of Trump, the most likely, they said at the time, to vote. Whether this holds or not is another story, right? That in 2 weeks we'll see. A lot can change, and we're coming to that again too. So that is pretty striking because, you know, Trump voters they're not monolithic. A lot of people, there's a lot of different reasons people voted for Donald Trump in 2016, including 46% of white women, right? We can't forget about that. That what they do will be key to the outcome on November 6th. And I'm going to revisit that in a little bit more detail later. This is something called the generic congressional ballot. And it is about the question of other advantages that Democrats have. So what happens with this survey question is pollsters ask, if the election were held today, would you vote for the Democratic candidate in the race or the Republican candidate in the race? No names. Generic Democrat, generic Republican. Okay? Democrats have had an advantage in the generic ballot this entire election cycle, which you'd expect, right? With the enthusiasm, with opposition to Trump, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. As of this morning, Democrats have about an 8-point advantage in generic ballot. Seems like that would be good news for Democrats, right? Well, this is a messy chart. I know, it just looks like a bunch of scribbles, but there's meaning here, trust me. What you've got is every midterm going back to 1994, and this is not a poll question that's asked very often, but this is every measurement that Gallup has done on generic ballot. And guess what? Democrats usually have a generic ballot advantage. It's nothing new that Democrats have a generic. They've always had a generic ballot advantage. And in part that's because more people in the United States report that they identify as a Democrat, that their partisan identification is with the Democrats. The other thing about the generic ballot is it's not a really good predictor of results. So when you read stories and hear stories about the generic ballot, take it with a grain of salt. Because the generic ballot in 2010 had Republicans. So what we're looking at here is the final generic ballot result and then results. So in 2010, the last generic ballot measure overestimated what Republicans did at the polls. Same thing in 2002. In 2012, 2004, 2002, 2004 underestimated Republican performance at the polls. So generic ballot, yeah, Democrats have a lead, but guess what? Doesn't mean squat. You're going to continue to hear news stories about the generic ballot. Throw them out. Doesn't mean anything. Who's that guy? It is not John Coors, no. Brett Kavanaugh, right? So, he is one of the major factors that's up in the air. Yeah, confirmation process is done, but it's still swirling. It's still out there. And in fact, it is why that enthusiasm advantage disappeared. This is from an NPR study. The lighter green line is the people who said the November elections are very important. So in July, 78% of Democrats said the November elections are very important, compared to only 68% of Republicans. That has changed significantly in October. Now, 82% of Democrats say the November elections are important, but guess what? 80% of Republicans do too. Republicans have caught up. Now, and this next piece is really interesting. We break it down by gender and party. So here, and we can, I think we can pay attention only to the darker lines. So 79% of Democratic women think voting in November is very important. 88% of Democratic men. 83% of Republican women think that voting in November is very important, compared to 78% of Republican men. So you break that out, right? And this very interesting gender dynamic appears. Democratic women not as, or fewer Democratic women than Democratic men saying it's important post-Kavanaugh. More Republican women than Republican men post-Kavanaugh. What does that mean? Are these Republican women really fired up? How, and what is going to drive, what's going to motivate them? Are they really mad at the Kavanaugh process and going to go vote for Democrats? Or are they really mad at the Kavanaugh process and going to double down and vote Republican? We'll see in 2 weeks. Here's a clip from a Politico story not that long ago. Don't read it. I'll just give you the gist of it. But it is it's some quotes from a Republican campaign operative. And Republicans are worried that their voters, especially Trump voters, aren't taking 2018 seriously. That they are looking at it, and so I'll read you this quote. Here's this Republican consultant. We've seen it in focus groups with Republican-based voters. Well, you come up with a hypothetical that the Democrats win, and people are like, that's not going to happen, that's stupid. Or they're like, to hell with this, we were told Trump wasn't going to win either. It's bull bleep. Republicans doubt polling. Republicans doubt good survey work. Republicans doubt these trends to their peril. If Republicans do not get out and vote, they will get creamed. If Republicans vote, those losses are mitigated. So here's this consultant again. I'd rather Sean Hannity get on TV every night and go, oh my God, Nancy Pelosi could be speaker and they're going to impeach Trump. You better get out to vote. And guess what you're seeing right now? You're seeing that exact thing in TV commercials. Here in Michigan, right? Trump has it's a super PAC allied with him. It's called America First something or other. America First Votes, America First something, doesn't matter. That is exactly what they're saying. You know, images of Nancy Pelosi, I think the only thing missing are like little devil horns that are coming out of her head. What'd you say, sir? Those are real? Is that what? Oh, they're okay. Now, Democrats, here's a Detroit News headline. Democratic leaders have learned their lesson, or so it seems. 2016, Democrats took a lot of things for granted. They took things like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio for granted. They lost them all. Right? And that's why Hillary Clinton lost. How many times did we see Hillary Clinton here before the last weekend before Election Day in 2016? Not a whole lot, right? So Democrats this time don't bet on the blue wave. That tells me let's not assume it, right? They're saying build it. Don't bet on it, build it. They're not going to take it for granted. Turnout, turnout, turnout. That's what matters for both sides. Before we get to the two races here, and while we're on turnout, before I forget, anybody want to guess what midterm turnout has averaged the last 20 years or so? Oh boy, you guys are way more cynical than I am. 20%, not 20, no, about 40. About 40%. Primary turnout is, sometimes we're lucky if it's 20, but midterm general election turnout, about 40%. Flip that around, what does that mean? 60% said to hell with it. Now, what percent of independents voted for Trump in 2016? I don't know that off the top of my head. I can certainly find it for you real quick. I'm happy to do that. What I do remember is, and I'll look at that specific number, but here's, and you just took me back to 2016, but there were a sizable number of Americans who said that neither, I think 15% of the electorate in 2016, so 15% of the people who showed up at the polls said that neither Donald Trump nor Hillary Clinton were qualified to be president. And 67% of them voted for Trump. Right? That is people saying, to hell with it. I don't care. I'm trying something different. Both my choices are awful, but I'm going to try something else. Right? That's a total tangent, but that got me to thinking. I'll look that up for you afterward, okay? Turnout, 40% turnout. It might go up this year. And you're seeing things like absentee ballots are being returned, all these absentee ballots that were requested. First things first, just because you because you request an absentee ballot, you got to turn it back in for it to count. Okay, so we'll see, right? Early voting numbers are up, in states that allow that. We'll see how big of an impact that has on turnout. Does it go up to 42%, 45%, 48%? Nobody can tell you that, right? Because all sorts of things happen. But even that, let's say 48%, 52% couldn't be bothered, right? Or are so disenchanted with the system that they are saying the heck with it, right? So you keep in mind, turnout numbers are all relative. When it's 40% is your sort of baseline, let's not get too excited about all these people that are voting, because there's just as many that aren't. So here are some polling numbers from Michigan 11. This is Haley Stevens and Lena Epstein. This is from Nate Silver at 538, and these are a series of polls that have been done. We can go back to, these are the top 5 here have been done in October. And the one outlier here is this latest one that's got him tied. The rest have Haley Stevens leading by either a hair or a sizable margin. Michigan 11 is a district that shouldn't be competitive. In fact, I would argue that it is competitive because of something that happened in 2012. Anybody know who used to be the member here before Dave Trott? 2 before. We had the reindeer farmer, Carrie Bentivolio, in that seat. but he got to be in that seat only because the representative before, Thaddeus McCotter, couldn't get on the ballot because his staffers faked a bunch of signatures. So Thaddeus McCotter didn't qualify for the ballot in 2012, and it set off a series of events that led us to Haley Stevens running against Lena Epstein. Just based on these, I don't know about this. This is the outlier, right? That says that they're tied. Could it be, these polling numbers, and I'm with you to some extent, ma'am. Take them with a grain of salt. Polls about election outcomes are only as good as their sample. If pollsters don't draw their sample in a way that mirrors election day turnout, it's going to be wrong. That's what happened in 2016. The polls in Michigan missed badly. They were off by 4 or 5 points. Right? They all had Hillary Clinton winning, not comfortably, but close in Michigan by 4 or 5 points. And they're wrong because they didn't sample correctly. They missed predicting turnout. They overestimated turnout in Detroit and Wayne County, and they underestimated turnout up north and in rural areas. When pollsters don't hit their turnout numbers right, it's going to be wrong. So these could be wrong. Sure, they could. But most of these folks are really good at it. Are they going to be wrong every once in a while? Absolutely. We'll see if they learn their lesson or if they can predict well enough in 2012. So I would wager that there's a significant difference in the samples of Anzalone and Target Insight. Because that's a 9.5 point difference in terms of outcome, right? And to your point, ma'am, Anzalone is a Democratic firm. Harper is a Republican firm, right? And sometimes they disagree. Their samples are different. That's why looking at a Real Clear Politics average evens that out, right? So, but you got to look at this and go, Stevens has got a real chance. In fact, she's got to be favored, right? How about the 8th, right where we are? Latest polls got Bishop up, including a New York Times poll from a couple weeks ago, and again that same Target Insight poll, Bishop up 3. Alyssa Slotkin has run a really quality campaign. Mike Bishop's no slouch, right? Mike Bishop is experienced. Mike Bishop knows what he's doing. And it's no surprise that he is close. Wouldn't shock me if he wins. Now, both of these districts are Republican. They're about 4 points more Republican than the nation, right? So Republicans have a built-in advantage in both of those districts. You see it showing up here with Mike Bishop, if that turns out to be correct, and you don't see it showing up here, at least in these other polls, if they turn out to be correct. Yes, ma'am. So the question's about, well, keep going. Those folks, non-citizens can't vote. That depends on the state. That depends on the state. I'm not sure what forms you're talking about. Are you talking like welfare, food stamps? What are we talking about? Those are federal programs that are administered by the state. Some states have granted more leeway with who gets public assistance versus others. And I would go back to my statement that non-citizens are not allowed to vote. Right? I mean, that's
Maybe her question is, what is the likelihood that someone who is not a citizen will be able to vote?
fair enough. What is the likelihood that someone who's not a citizen can vote? It's not zero, right? It's not 0%. That's just a fact, right? Mistakes could get made, right? Somebody could sneak. Is it massive? I don't think so. Now, is there voter fraud out there? Yeah, of course there is, right? Go to Chicago. Go to Louisiana. Vote early and often, right? Chicago has dead people vote all the time, right? Uncle Larry kicks the bucket. Larry Jr. goes in and votes at his place and then goes and votes for his dad, right? Who's in the ground. It happens. But is it a massive problem? I don't think so. Okay. So where are we now? Well, even the so-called experts can't agree. Here is Nate Silver and his 530, and Nate Silver gained a great deal of popularity in like 2008 with his predictions. He gives Democrats an 85% chance of taking control of the House. He says that his analysis has Democrats gaining 39 seats. Just keep in mind that Nate Silver told you Hillary Clinton had a 76% chance of winning. Just saying. Just saying. Is there a scenario where Democrats can win 39 seats? Sure. Sure. That's a wave in the House. No doubt. But here's real clear politics. And they do it a little different, right? And Nate Silver, there's a lot of things that go into his predictions, his models, his estimates. Real Clear Politics just use polls. Pretty bare bones, pretty straightforward. What they do is they take all of the House seats and look at them right now. This is as of this morning. And Real Clear Politics thinks that Democrats are sitting at 205 seats that they can count on, Republicans at 199, and that there are 31 House seats that are left up in the air. They argue that Democrats will gain anywhere between 10 and 41 seats, with an average of 25. 25 is by how many? 2. This could change, right? Maybe it goes to 30, maybe it goes to 20, right? And then right, the only one that really matters is what happens on election day anyway. But it's fun to talk about this stuff 2 weeks ahead of time, right? So, it just shows you that there's varying ways to interpret all of this data that's out there, right? This is close. 205 to 199, there's 6-seat difference if we sort of took everything that's not set in stone but is likely at this point and then battle it out for 31 more. That's not a lot of seats, and that could go a bunch of different ways. Here's the Senate. Here is latest polling in all of the most competitive Senate races. And remember, Democrats need two to win control. So they need to flip 2 Republican-held seats. Indiana, Joe Donnelly, he is up in the polls by less than a point, and it's going down, or this is lower than it was the day before. Hawley in Missouri, up really close against Claire McCaskill. That would be a Republican pickup. Democratic hold, if these were the results. Democratic hold, Republican pickup. Bill Nelson in Florida, looks like his standing in the polls is improving. Democratic hold. Arizona would be a Republican hold. Nevada would be a Republican hold. Montana, there's Mr. Tester, probably going to win, right? Democratic hold. Texas, Ted Cruz, even though he's on Charlie Cook's toss-up list, his standing in the polls has gone up pretty significantly in the last month. He was tied for a while. Now he's up 7 points. Bob Menendez should not be on this chart. New Jersey should not be a competitive seat, but Bob Menendez has got some ethics problems that are, he's had them for like 20 years, that have been, it's New Jersey. I mean, there's some axioms in politics, right? Dead people vote in Chicago, and New Jersey's corrupt. Sorry, that's going on TV somewhere. Democrat hold. Marsha Blackburn in Tennessee, Republican hold. And Wisconsin, Minnesota. This is the big one. North Dakota. That would be a Republican pickup. So if these were to hold, Republicans would pick up 2 seats. Missouri and North Dakota. Notice Indiana, Missouri, where'd she go? North Dakota, West Virginia. Those were the big names in the Kavanaugh process. Claire McCaskill votes no on Kavanaugh. She starts to lose. Let's see. North Dakota, Heidi Heitkamp votes no, and almost immediately tanks. Manchin votes yes. Manchin votes yes. Saved his job. West Virginia, right? Had he voted no, this would not be his poll number today. He would probably be losing. He'd probably be in a similar situation as Heidi Heitkamp, down 10 points. So it is I put Kavanaugh up there for a reason, and this is it. It had, that process and those votes had a huge impact on at least three of the most competitive Senate races that we've got going. Here's Nate Silver on the Senate. 82% chance that Republicans keep control. And he's a little bit less enthusiastic about Republican prospects, predicting, tell me how you get this, a 0.6 seat gain. I mean, come on, Nate, round it up to 1. Come on. But, what's the most likely scenario? Republicans pick up a seat or 2. According to the, and I think that this Real Clear Politics data backs it up, right? And here's speaking of Real Clear Politics, there's their chart with 6 toss-ups left, right? And Republicans at 50 seats with 6 toss-ups to go, that they might gain, 2 or 3. We'll see how it turns out. So just a few things, right? 2018 is likely to be a tough year for Republicans, but by how much, we don't know yet. That remains to be seen. Turnout. We sort of got into this before, but turnout wins elections. Whichever party, whichever candidate turns their people out better wins, especially in an election cycle, in a midterm, right, where we're talking about 45, 48, whatever percent, somewhere in the 40s, right, percent turnout. That tells me when presidential turnout is 62, 63, both parties have a lot of room to find a lot of voters. There's a lot of folks that turned out and voted Democrat in 2016 that aren't going to turn out in 2018. Same on the Republican side. The two parties have a chance to increase their turnout numbers to help them win races across the country. That's a significant thing that you're going to see over the next 2 weeks. Turnout operations, get out the vote efforts start to really kick into high gear. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. They were also. They most certainly are, and you think we had an arrangement before because that's next in 2 bullets. We talked about the Trump voters, right? They seem to be, at least some polling data seems to suggest that. More importantly, here's the answer to your question. There are hundreds of thousands of people in Michigan alone that showed up to the polls November 2016 and didn't choose Clinton or Trump. 75,000 people in Michigan alone went into the voting booth in November 2016 and looked at their ballot and said, Trump, Clinton. I can't do it. They skipped it. And they voted down the ballot, right? So think about that person. Goes to the polls, looks at their ballot, decides they can't vote for president, but votes for everything else. That is a sophisticated voter, if you ask me. That is a sophisticated decision. So there's 75,000 of them. And then there are another 250,000 people who went into the voting booth and said, Clinton or Trump. I can't do it. I'm voting for Jill Stein or Gary Johnson or one of the other third-party candidates. 250,000 people in Michigan voted third party. That is 5 times more third-party votes in a presidential year than 2012. 5 times more. That is a ton of votes. That is also a pretty sophisticated voting decision, if you ask me, from those people, right? So I think it's a safe bet that those 325,000 people are going to vote in 2018. What do they do is the big question, right? How, do they vote third party again? Who knows, right? But I think they're gonna turn out. I think a lot of those third party votes in the presidential level went to Gary Johnson. Most folks would say that those are probably Republican votes, right? Gary Johnson, libertarian, sort of closer to the Republican way of thinking, if you will. Certainly not a done deal, but it's certainly not out of the question either. So that's 325,000 votes. That might not seem like a lot, but in a close race, in a congressional district or a statewide race, it's sure as heck enough to change the outcome. Sure as heck enough to change the outcome. And then we still got 2 weeks. That is an eternity in politics. And you look at, stuff is going to happen that is going to impact the results on Election Day. We don't know what it is. Oh. Right, so the question about the stock market, right? And what was it, down 600 today? A week ago or so, it was down 500, and then it went back up 500, right? It's bouncing around, right? Will some people look at it and be skittish about keeping going the way we're going? Maybe.
Just wondered, have you tried something happening other medical non-emergency?
That I know of, most of the empirical work that's been done is focused on those macro level indicators, economic indicators like GDP, unemployment, right? Those things that are more stable or more big picture rather than a up or down week or so in the market. But it wouldn't be, I mean, if it keeps going down for 2 weeks, then yeah, then it's a problem, right, for Republicans. But think about a couple things, right? The caravan that's coming through Mexico. That's a huge issue. It's going to play out for the next 2 weeks. Immigration is going to come back as an issue. Goodness gracious, the bombs that were at the George Soros, the Obama's place, Clinton's place, right? I mean, who's doing that, for crying out loud? So security comes back. Is it terrorism? I mean, nobody's saying that. But we got to figure out who the heck did it first. So let's let that happen and then see. But last week, if we'd have said, "Oh, there's going to be half a dozen bombs placed around the country at former presidents and key political people," you'd be like, "Yeah, you're crazy, right?" Well, no, you're not, because it happened, right? So the point is, there's a long time to happen here. A lot of stuff's going to happen in the next 2 weeks, and anything like that could change the outcome. Anybody that tells you they know what's going to happen on November 6th is a liar. Nobody knows. So I can't tell you what's going to happen. Well, but the polls are good at giving us an indicator of what things are right now, right? That's a really good point, and we should make that clear, that, right, polls are just a snapshot in time, and they give us an indicator. And I think if they're done the right way, they give us a very reliable way of thinking about and looking at how things are now. They can't tell us what things are going to be in 2 weeks. So the question is about, I just forgot it. Oh yeah, change in willingness of people to respond. Pollsters, I'll put it this way: pollsters' jobs are getting harder. It's getting a lot more difficult. Response rates go down, but to this point, and I just read something about this the other day too. I wish I could remember all the details, but it didn't change my answer. The work that's been done to this point shows that folks who respond to or are willing to be interviewed or willing to respond to a poll are not that much different than people who don't. But it's getting harder to get to people, right? It used to be that you couldn't do it by cell phone. Now you can. And good pollsters will mix landlines and cell phones. Some are getting more into online, trying to get to people another way, right? But think about this, right? Do we have anybody who goes to Florida for a few months? Couple, right? So give me my parents, right? They vote in Florida because that's where they're residents. But the last time they changed their cell phone plan, it was here. So they have a 248 number. So nobody can poll them for the Florida governor's race or Senate race that's hot right now, right? They get called, they're going to get asked about Schuette and Whitmer and go, who the hell are them, right? So it's little things like that, right, are making it more difficult. They have to make a lot more calls to get sample size that's appropriate, and that a sample size that's large enough and that is representative of the group that we want to study. Yes, ma'am. Oh. Yes, ma'am. Oh, if there's one thing that's going to make the college kids turn out, it's Proposal 1. That's the marijuana proposal. I think you'll see a marginal increase because of the ballot proposals, and I think they're all going to pass. Oh, we got some groans over here on that one. Okay. Some will pass with higher margins than others, but I think they all pass. Buck.
You've talked this whole time and you never mentioned dollars.
Oh, money. Yeah. It's funny. I took out a couple of slides that had some fundraising. You've seen in recent days some stories about how Democrats are outraising Republicans. Absolutely. But, and that's good for them. But that doesn't mean that Republicans who are running against those Democrats don't have enough money to compete. Take Michigan 8. Alyssa Slotkin has raised a ton of money. Mike Bishop's got enough, right? He's got enough to compete for the next 2 weeks. And if he doesn't have it in his campaign account, guess what? The National Republican Campaign Committee is going to come in, or outside groups are going to come in. I don't think that means as much as some are making it out to be, because Republicans in those, think about just those 30 races that Real Clear's got left on the board, right? Those 30 races, Republicans are going to have enough money to compete, either from their own campaign account, the party can come in, or outside groups. So are Democrats advantaged? Yes, but I think by less than some would have us believe. Yes, sir. Is your absentee ballot going to be in the totals? Absolutely. Yeah. They'll get counted right. I think right after all the election day ballots get counted. Yeah. Absolutely. Yes, ma'am. Why don't we hear about the deficit? That is a great question. It is a wonderful question. It's funny. Think back to the end of 2017. Big tax cut bill passes, right? It's less money that's coming into the federal government. Democrats found the deficit as an issue. They were aghast. This is going to blow a hole in the deficit. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? The sky is falling. Before that, Democrats hadn't cared about the deficit for 40 years. Seriously, right? But and the Republicans are just as big a hypocrites, because $2 trillion or however many it was, $2 trillion in less taxes coming in over a decade. No big deal. Right? And that's the party that for those same 40 years has been telling us, we got to watch out for the deficit. Watch out for the debt, right? For like 4 minutes. It was, you're right. And you know who deserves credit for that? And the Republican Congress. Because this is a pet peeve. I have many pet peeves. But this is one of them. That presidents get blamed for the deficit. They have very little to do with it. It's the Congress that writes the spending bills. The Congress writes the laws. Yeah, the president signs them, right? And yeah, it went up X trillion dollars in the Obama administration and X trillion dollars in the Trump administration. It's the Congress that writes the bills that spend more than we have. Period. Right? And some of that is, a lot of it, a lot more than we'd think, is non-discretionary. Has to be spent. Defense contracts, service on the debt, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, right? Those Those things are non-negotiable. And they have a big impact on our budget, right, on federal budget. So, the president, I think, gets too much blame for, and all presidents get too much blame for deficits. All presidents get too much credit for a good economy and too much blame for a bad one. That is universal, right? But we don't care about we don't hear about the deficit because not enough people care, and nobody thinks it's going to come back to bite us. Did we find it from other places or borrow it from? Well, that's being very frank. You're going to keep getting it. I'm not. Right. You're welcome, sir. Can I give you some more? Right? And who votes, right? Those that are the older Americans vote way more than young Americans. Yes, ma'am. Oh, sure you do. Oh my gosh. Social Security, Medicare, those are on the ballot all the time, right? And God forbid anybody starts talking about that. And AARP, all your dues are well spent by AARP, right? The lobbyists and stuff, you got them too with AARP, right? So they do a heck of a job. Yes, ma'am.
Question on the ballot regarding the district.
Proposal 2.
So how independent are those people? I was told by someone who supposedly knew they're going to be paid 25% of the governor's salary. Is that accurate?
Boy, you're getting into the nitty-gritty of the 3,000 words of Proposal 2. How independent are they going to be? So Proposal 2, right, everybody knows that's the redistricting one. It proposes 13 people will be responsible for drawing district lines. 4 of them Democrats, 4 of them Republicans, and 5 independents. So, think about that for a minute. 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, 5 independents. Who in this room thinks that they're an independent? That's it? Really? That's all 3? 4, 5, that's still 6, 7, 8, 9. Boy, I expected half the room to go up. And that ruined my answer. Doggone it. Yeah. That's true. Party ID is still the best predictor of vote choice. But my joke was going to be that all those people that put their hands up, most of you are liars. Because what we know is that darn near everybody has got at least a little bit of latent partisanship. That people may say, I'm an independent. And I think it's got something to do with the moniker, right? With the term. Independent. Think about that, right? Independent. I'm not with those idiots. I'm not with those buffoons. I'm independent. I think for myself, right? And because of we don't have a membership party system in the United States, so the best we can do is ask people through surveys, right? And we find that these days, independents far outnumber Republicans or Democrats. 40-some% of Americans claim that they're independent. But guess what? When you just nudge them a little bit and say, well, okay, you say you're independent, but if you say you sort of leaned one way or the other, would you say you lean to the Democrats or lean to the Republicans? Immediately, just about everybody cops to being a Republican or Democrat. So the true independent is about 10%. Back to your question. the devil's in the details with this stuff, right? So I don't know. It will be very interesting to watch how that process plays, because I think that's going to pass. It'll be very interesting to see how that plays out. But the complaint now is, right, that it's too partisan. It's the one party can stick it to the other. Now there's some protection in there for this, because you've got to get, I think, 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats on the commission to sign off before a redistricting plan would go forward. So there's got to be some partisan agreement. But 5 independents says who? Says who, right? I mean, so you do have to sign an affidavit that says that you are a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent. What's the proof? How are they going to tell me you're wrong, right? You know, I suppose you could go back and look at what presidential primaries have you voted in. If you voted in the Republican presidential primaries back to Reagan, then it's kind of hard to say you're an independent. But would you be prosecuted for that? Goodness gracious. That's true, right.
Nor can my wife, nor can my stepdaughter.
Right. I believe there's money in there for their work. Yes. I know that there's an ad on the radio now that is going after the cost of this whole thing, and it will be more than it is now, I believe. But I got 4.6. I got 5.5. Do I hear 10.8? It'll be a lot. It'll be money. But I'll just admit, I don't know the details of how that budget would work. How are the 13 commissioners? They will be chosen with, it's after it passes, you will be able to apply. You'll be able to put your name forward as, I want to be part of the redistricting commission. So it's self-selection, plus I believe the Secretary of State will be mandated to send out at random application to 10,000 people across Michigan. So they'll try to get folks to participate that way. And then that gets winnowed down through a process, and eventually, and there's multiple steps. You end up with 13 people. It's really complex. Yeah. What do you mean by voter fraud? So hacking the system. And you didn't say this, but let's just be clear that there's no evidence that took place in 2016. Did the Russians fiddle with some email accounts and hack the DNA? Yes, right? But were any votes changed? No, right? I think that you've seen states who are in charge of elections look at their systems and take some steps to try and make sure that they're secure. Does that mean it's totally secure? Of course not, right? Just about anything can get hacked, right? Gosh, a month ago we had it had some slick name for it. Right on OU's campus, they had a day where hackers came and tried to hack some stuff. I don't know what that means, but people do it, right? Anytime we're thinking about computers, right, it's a worry. And think about this, right, that there's calls for online voting, online voter registration. The more you get into the electronic world, the more vulnerable you are, right? I mean, we got an IT specialist in the back, Derek, right? He's a former student. You could probably answer that one better. Seven minutes to hack the Florida election system. So let's hope there's no 7-year-old girls in China that are trying to hack Florida's election system. Goodness gracious. Yes, ma'am. Stan Grott, and he's the clerk in Shelby Township. Mary Trader Lang, candidate for Secretary of State. I haven't heard or I haven't seen their information. I would be very interested to see it. Oh, awesome. Yes, ma'am. I would say you can get the language itself from the Secretary of State. Yes. If you search for, if you just Google Michigan 2018 Proposal 2, Michigan 2018 Proposal 3, you'll get the language.
Five or six different pieces to that proposal.
Which one? 2? It's 3,000 words.
Yeah, 3,000 words, but it addresses voter registration.
Oh, that's Proposal 3.
Is that
3 is the voter reg, bringing back the partisan section on your ballot, and something else. That's 3. Yes, ma'am.
Proposal 1, as more and more states are legalizing not only medical marijuana,
Yeah.
recreational,
Sure.
how is it that you can get on a ballot when marijuana use is illegal?
That's a great question, and it is true that federal law trumps state law. So, as I understand that, the federal government could right now go into Colorado and California and Washington and shut all of it down, but they don't. It's about there's cash that's flowing into the state's coffers, right? And I also think too that the federal government wouldn't want to look like they are stepping on states, right?
I work for banks. I'm actually an investigator.
Oh wow, oh my gosh.
I've been doing it for about 13 years. I have a job for 9/11. As a banker of over 30 years, what I have found in my job is because marijuana is illegal federally, banks do not bank they will not bank anything medical marijuana related.
Really?
So what it does is it drives all those people
Huh.
to the ground. And it recently made news where there was a local dispensary that was laundering millions of dollars through a money service business that was located right next to it. So
That's really interesting. I didn't know that about the bank not taking a medical marijuana deposit.
the major banks in the area will not bank anyone medically marijuana related, whether you're a dispensary, it might even go to if you're a marijuana attorney, hydroponic school.
Interesting. So there,
They're being driven underground.
yeah. So where do the taxes come? Where do so there are a ton of unanswered questions, right, about this, and I'll do a shameless self promotion here. We just started something at OU's campus called the Center for Civic Engagement, and one of the goals that I have with the center is for Oakland to become known as a convener of conversations about important issues. We want to be the place where the public can come and have, imagine this, civil, respectful, productive conversations about important issues. So, and I was just talking to a couple of faculty in our School of Nursing the other day about Center for Civic Engagement, and this issue came up. And I told them that what I want to do in our winter semester, so after the first of the year, I want to have a conversation that, and I'm thinking of this as a fun title, marijuana is legal, now what? Right, so what do we do, right? What are the issues that are going to play now? What are the unintended consequences that are already coming up? So we want to we're going to gather a panel of experts to talk about issues like this, and maybe you should be on the panel. I mean, that is an angle that nobody's thinking about.
It's scary enough. I'm pretty certain it's going to pass.
Yeah.
It scares me on two levels. I have a 20-year-old college son. That scares me.
Sure.
And it also scares me that I may be kind of protected. Right? It's going to be a nightmare if that passes.
That's really interesting. It's really something. Again, I think that it's a fine example of one action that government takes or that the citizenry takes, and it's got this domino effect just in directions that you'd never think of, right? It's a great question. These are constitutional amendments, so it would take another constitutional amendment to do it. It would take. Sir, you had a question in the front.
Yeah, sir, if I may, are there reliable statistics that are available to you on the gender voting in the last presidential election?
Absolutely.
And how does that break down?
More women, and the gender gap has been around for decades. Women tend to vote Democratic more than men.
What was the breakdown in the last election?
I would have to look. I can pull it up for you after when we're done.
Then I want you to compare, same thing, gender voting, those men who declared themselves in some reliable way before the election as Democrats.
Right.
How did they vote?
So if Democratic men, how did they vote for Clinton? I think that it would be a high percentage, very high percentage. Party identification, gender aside, remains the best predictor of vote choice.
The men who were Democrat didn't pass over during that election to vote for Republican?
Some did.
Some, but not applicable?
I'd have to look at the data, which I can get for you.
That comes from subjective indications that were published after the debates and
Mm-hmm. Sure.
what happened with, on certain
Mm-hmm.
he did. And then the result being, from what I understand, may have been this, that said, well, I'm not going to vote for her.
Ooh.
And they were Democrats.
This isn't your question, but you didn't say this explicitly, but are there people out there who didn't vote for Hillary Clinton because she's a woman? Sure. Are there people out there who voted for Hillary Clinton because she's a woman? Sure.
That's the direction I'm going.
Yeah, and people have. I mean, think about how you make your decisions, right? Not that any of you would do that, but there are people out there who say, "I'm voting for Gretchen Whitmer because she's a woman," or I'll pick on Italians since I'm Italian, or I'm voting for the Italian sounding name because I'm Italian, or I'm voting for the German because I'm German, or whatever, right? Or what? Or to go back to George W. Bush, he's the candidate I'd like to have a beer with, right?
It's more specific. Hillary Clinton was a known person as married to Bill for a number of years.
Yeah,
Okay, so that has to go into it subjectively.
sure.
And then the men who have Bill and her, I'm not going to vote.
Listen, I mean, Hillary Clinton had, I think you could easily argue, the best resume of any presidential candidate. But she also had the best resume of any presidential candidate. I mean, she's been around for decades, right? And a lot of people said, I had enough with the Clintons, right? Enough. Think about they're going on this tour, right? An evening with Bill and Hillary. They're charging, no doubt. And people had a lot of Americans had enough of the Clintons, right, in 2016. And think about this tour that they're going on now. It's going to be more of the same, right? Is this an intro for her to run in 2020? I won't say any more, ma'am. There you go. You answered the question for me. Yes, sir.
Are you going to do a post-election presentation anywhere?
I'll give you two things. I'll come back anytime you want. And you're also welcome on campus. We're going to have a post-election forum wrap-up November 15th, 11:30 to 1 in the Oakland Center. If you would like to come, I'll leave some cards. You send me an email, and we'll put you on the list. And I'm only asking for no, it's the opposite. I'm going to ask for RSVP because we're going to give you lunch. And I just got to know the count. That's all. So, then I got to get some more money to pay for the lunch. Oh, that's awesome. Thank you for coming to campus. And I'll tell you, at the post-election roundup, we're going to have Chuck Stokes from Channel 7 is going to come. Emily Lawler from MLive is going to be there, and a pollster from Lansing to talk about data. So you're more than welcome. Yes, ma'am. Voter suppression, and you're probably talking about Georgia. What's happening in North Dakota? Oh my gosh, that is an incredibly difficult problem. The Native Americans, the address issue. Frankly, for a long time, college students face the same problem here in Michigan. I wouldn't call that suppression. I would call that access, right? I mean, it's and I believe that the Native Americans, or the hurdle that they have, is that their land is sovereign, right? And it's a different relationship that they have with the government. That is a hurdle that yeah, but there ought to be a solution to it, right? What is it?
There is a device available on the internet. What three names? Every place, your address will be identified, no matter where you are in the world, with three names in your local language. It's being used by the group in London.
Okay.
You can go on the internet, sign up, and you can find your address. That they've assigned three names because it's physically
Interesting.
with our alphabet to do that. And our names.
That's fascinating. Yes. And that's not the only issue that is a really big one with that community, right? I mean, I think I read the other day that women in the Native American community are 2.5 times or 4.5 times more likely to be sexually assaulted. The suicide rate in the Native American community is really high. Alcoholism, drug abuse. There are a lot of issues need to be looked at with that community for sure. Oh, all right, one more. Yes, sir. Yeah. Blatant malfeasance in Georgia. It is in Georgia. What I know about Georgia is there's a state law that says you get booted off the voter rolls if you haven't voted in a set number of elections and for some other reasons. Now, the Republican candidate for governor there is taking heat for this. Well, he is the chief elections officer, but he didn't write that law, right? The legislature writes those laws. But he has to uphold them, right? He has to execute them. It's not. And the.
But my question is bigger than that, really. In addition to that, there are voter purges going on.
Sure, people get booted off the voter rolls all the time because of state laws that say if you don't vote in, 4 straight elections, you're off. Why? And there's a legitimate reason for that. What's the legitimate reason for that? You're dead. That's right. That's right. You're dead or you're moved, right? When you vote anyway. So it's not all dastardly. I guess that's my That's what I would say, is that it's not all devious and nefarious. Yeah. Oh, I violated the one more question. Sorry.
Marijuana issue, would you, this is your program, would you ask the array here, how many people would be concerned if marijuana passed?
Well, you ask him. You just did.
On motor vehicle safety.
Are you concerned about motor vehicle safety should the marijuana pass? It's the same as booze, right? Worse.
Serving brownies at the post.
As a matter of fact, we will have brownies, but there will not be any extra additions. That's probably where a good place to end it. But thanks everybody for coming.